The stars looked different through the viewport of the USS Horizon as Jake Parker stared into the black void of space. 3 months had passed since humanity first achieved faster-than-light travel, and Jake still could not believe he was here among the stars. The communication console in front of him hummed quietly as he monitored the empty frequencies that stretched across the galaxy. Captain Lisa Morgan had chosen this sector for exploration because the long-range sensors showed something unusual. Near the edge of known space, Jake adjusted his headset and ran another scan through the communication arrays. At 26 years old, he was the youngest officer on the bridge, but his skills with alien communication protocols had earned him this position on humanity's first deep space exploration mission. He grew up on a farm in Montana where his father taught him that patience and observation were the keys to understanding any creature, whether it was a wild horse or something from another world. The bridge crew worked quietly around him as they moved deeper into unexplored territory. Lieutenant Commander Betty Davis monitored the navigation systems while Chief Science Officer Dr. Alex Carter analyzed every piece of data that came through the sensors. Captain Morgan stood near the center of the bridge with her arms crossed as she watched the main screen that showed their path through space. Everything changed when the sensors detected something massive approaching from the port side. Dr. Carter looked up from his console with wide eyes and called out to the captain. The object was huge and moving faster than anything humanity had ever built. Captain Morgan ordered all stations to battle readiness as the unknown vessel came into visual range. Jake felt his heart stop when he saw it on the main screen. The alien ship was unlike anything humans had ever imagined. It stretched over a kilometer in length, and its black surface seemed to absorb all the light around it. Strange symbols glowed along its hull in patterns that hurt to look at directly. The ship had no visible weapons, but its size alone made it more threatening than an entire human fleet. The communication console suddenly came alive with activity. Signals poured in from the alien vessel in frequencies that Jake had never encountered before. He worked quickly to filter the transmissions and found patterns that might represent language. His training had prepared him for this moment, but nothing could have prepared him for what came next. A deep voice filled the bridge through the communication system. The sound was unlike anything human vocal cords could produce. It rumbled like thunder and seemed to shake the metal walls of the ship. The alien spoke in perfect English, which somehow made it even more terrifying. Human vessel, you will identify your leaders and prepare for communication. I am Vaxthil of the Krythani, and I speak for my people in this sector of space. Captain Morgan stepped forward and activated the communication system. Her voice shook slightly as she responded. This is Captain Lisa Morgan of the United Earth. Vessel USS Horizon. We come in peace and seek only to explore this region of space. Peace is earned through strength, human captain. I will board your vessel to determine if your species is worthy of communication with the Krythani. The bridge fell silent except for the hum of the life support systems. Jake watched as fear spread across the faces of his fellow crew members. Chief Davis gripped her console so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Dr. Carter pushed his glasses up his nose with a shaking hand as he stared at the readings from the alien ship. Captain Morgan tried to maintain her composure, but Jake could see the concern in her eyes. She had commanded ships for 15 years and fought in 3 different conflicts, but nothing had prepared her for first contact with an alien species. The protocols they had studied seemed worthless when faced with a being that could crush their ship without effort. Very well, Vaxthal. We will prepare a meeting area in our main cargo bay. How many will be in your party? I come alone. Your vessel is too small for more than one Krythani warrior. Jake felt a chill run down his spine at those words. The alien ship could hold thousands of beings, but only one was coming aboard because their ship was too small for more. He began to wonder just how large these Krythani actually were. 20 minutes later, the crew gathered in the cargo bay to wait for their visitor. Security teams positioned themselves around the room with weapons ready, but everyone knew they would be useless against technology that could cross the galaxy. Captain Morgan stood near the airlock with Ambassador Richard Stone, who had been awakened. From cryogenic sleep for this historic moment, Jake positioned himself near the communication equipment that had been set up to record the encounter. His job was to monitor all transmissions and watch for any signs of hostile intent from the alien visitor. He checked his equipment one final time as the airlock began to cycle. The first sign of Vaxthal was a shadow that fell across the cargo bay floor. The alien warrior had to duck his head to fit through the airlock door, and even then his massive frame barely squeezed through the opening. Jake felt his breath catch in his throat as he got his first look at humanity's first alien. Contact.vax Xthal stood 12 feet tall with a body that looked like it had been carved from black stone. 4 powerful arms hung at his sides, each ending in hands that could crush a human skull without effort. His face was angular and sharp with burning red eyes that seemed to look through everything they focused on. When he moved, the deck plates creaked under his weight. The alien warrior wore no clothing except for decorative metal bands around his arms that were covered in symbols that glowed with inner light. Scars crisscrossed his chest and arms telling stories of countless battles fought across the galaxy. When he breathed, the sound filled the cargo bay like wind through a cave. Ambassador Stone stepped forward with his hand extended in greeting, but stopped when Vaxthal fixed those burning eyes on him. The ambassador's face went pale and his extended hand began to shake. The other crew members took steps backward as the alien warrior surveyed the room. Jake watched it all unfold and realized something that the others had missed. While Vaxthal looked terrifying, his body language suggested curiosity rather than aggression. The alien's 4 arms hung loose at his sides rather than being positioned for attack. His head moved as he examined the humans around him, but his eyes showed interest rather than hostility. Most importantly, Jake noticed that, despite having claws that could tear through metal, Vaxthal kept them retracted. Everything about the alien suggested someone who was trying not to appear threatening rather than someone preparing for violence. Jake began to wonder if humanity's first alien contact was going very wrong simply because they were too afraid to see what was really in front of them. 3 days had passed since Vaxthal returned to his ship, and the tension aboard the USS Horizon had only grown worse. Captain Morgan paced the bridge while waiting for word from Earth Command about how to proceed with the first alien contact in human history. The crew spoke in whispers, and many had trouble sleeping knowing that the massive Krythani vessel still hung in space nearby like a dark moon. Jake spent those 3 days analyzing every second of the encounter in the cargo bay. He watched the recorded footage dozens of times and studied each movement that Vaxthal had made. The more he analyzed the alien warrior's behavior, the more convinced he became that humanity was missing something important about their first contact. Earth Command finally sent their response through the quantum communication array, a neutral meeting space would be constructed halfway between the 2 ships using materials and technology from both species. Ambassador Stone would lead the human delegation while Vaxthal would represent the Krythani. The meeting would determine whether the 2 species could coexist peacefully, or if humanity faced its first interstellar war. The construction took 2 full days as human engineers worked alongside Krythani builders who operated through remote drones. The resulting station was a marvel of combined technology that neither species could have built alone. The human sections were bright and airy with smooth walls and comfortable lighting, while the Krythani areas were built from dark metals with high ceilings and symbols that glowed with strange energy. Jake watched the construction through the viewport and marveled at how the 2 different building styles somehow worked together. The human engineers had learned to adapt their designs to accommodate Krythani needs, while the alien builders had modified their usual methods to create spaces that humans could actually use. It gave him hope that maybe the 2 species could find common ground. Ambassador Stone spent the time before the meeting reviewing every piece of information that humanity had gathered about alien psychology and first contact procedures. He was a career diplomat who had resolved conflicts between Earth nations for 30 years, but he admitted privately to Captain Morgan that nothing had prepared him for this challenge. The weight of representing all of humanity in their first diplomatic contact with an alien species was almost crushing, The day of the meeting arrived with both ships, sending shuttles to the new station. Jake had requested permission to join the diplomatic team as their communication specialist, and Captain Morgan had reluctantly agreed. She knew that Jake had studied alien communication theory more than anyone else on the ship, and his observations during the first encounter had been valuable. The human delegation consisted of Ambassador Stone, Jake, Security Chief Karen White, and Dr. Carter, who would analyze any technology or cultural information that came from the meeting. They wore their best dress uniforms and carried translation equipment that might help them understand Krythani communication better. Jake felt his heart racing as their shuttle docked with the station. Through the viewports he could see the Krythani shuttle, which was twice the size of their own vessel and built from the same dark metal as their ship. Strange symbols glowed along its hull, and he wondered what they meant in the alien language. The human delegation entered the main meeting room, which had been designed as a compromise between human and Krythani architectural styles. The ceiling was high enough for a Krythani, but not so high that humans would feel dwarfed. The lighting was bright enough for humans to see clearly, but not so bright that it would offend alien sensibilities. A large table sat in the center with chairs sized for both species. They waited for 10 minutes before the Krythani delegation arrived. The sound of heavy footsteps echoed through the corridors before Vaxthal appeared in the doorway. He had to duck slightly to enter the room, but the high ceiling allowed him to stand at his full height once inside. Today he wore additional armor, pieces that gleamed with the same inner light as his armbands. Ambassador Stone rose from his chair to greet their guest, but the words seemed to stick in his throat as Vaxthal fixed those burning red eyes on him. The alien warrior moved to the oversized chair that had been built for him and sat down with movements that were surprisingly graceful for someone so large. "I greet you humans in the name of the Krythani Empire," Vaxthal said in his deep rumbling voice. "I am here to determine if your species possesses the strength and honor necessary for friendship with my people." Ambassador Stone cleared his throat and tried to find his diplomatic voice. "We welcome you, Vaxthal, and hope that our two species can find common ground for peaceful coexistence. Humanity seeks only to explore the galaxy and learn from other civilizations." The alien warrior leaned forward in his chair, and the metal frame creaked under his weight. "Peace without strength is meaningless, human ambassador. How can we trust a species that shows fear when faced with power?" Jake watched as Ambassador Stone's face went pale at those words. The diplomat tried to maintain his composure, but his hands shook as he reached for his notes. The other members of the human delegation shifted uncomfortably in their seats as Vaxthal's red eyes swept over them. "We mean no disrespect," Ambassador Stone managed to say. "Humanity simply believes that conflict should be resolved through discussion rather than violence." Vaxthal made a sound that might have been laughter, but it rumbled like distant thunder. "Discussion is for those who have already proven their worth in battle. Your species hides behind words because you lack the courage to face the galaxy's dangers directly." The meeting continued for another hour, but it was clear that the formal diplomatic approach was failing. Ambassador Stone became more nervous with each exchange, while Vaxthal seemed to grow more frustrated with what he saw as human weakness. The alien warrior's body language shifted from curious to agitated as he began to believe that humans were either cowards or were hiding their true intentions. Jake realized that the meeting was about to collapse, and with it any hope for peaceful relations between the two species. The formal protocols that worked for human diplomacy were completely wrong for dealing with a warrior culture that valued strength and directness above everything else. Without asking permission, Jake stood up from his chair and walked toward Vaxthal. The security chief reached for her weapon, but Jake waved her off as he approached the giant alien warrior. Ambassador Stone started to object, but Jake was already moving. The cargo bay fell silent as Jake stopped directly in front of Vaxthal's chair. The alien warrior looked down at him with those burning red eyes, and Jake felt like an ant standing before a mountain. But instead of backing down, Jake met the gaze directly and extended his hand toward the alien. "I'm Jake Parker," he said in a steady voice. I was the communication officer who monitored our first contact, and I've been studying your people ever since. Vaxthal stared at the small human who dared to approach him without fear. Slowly he extended one massive finger, tipped with a claw that could slice through steel. Jake didn't flinch as the alien touched his palm with surprising gentleness. You are different from the other small human, Vaxthal said. You do not show fear in the presence of a Krythani warrior. Jake smiled and kept his hand steady as the alien examined him. Fear is natural when meeting something new, but I'm more curious than afraid. Your people must have amazing stories about the galaxy and the worlds you've seen. For the first time since the meeting began, Vaxthal seemed to relax slightly. The tension in his shoulders eased and his voice lost some of its threatening edge. You wish to know about the Krythani rather than simply negotiate with us. I want to understand your people, Jake replied honestly. Humans believe that friendship comes from understanding, and I think we've been approaching this meeting all wrong. Vaxthal leaned back in his chair and studied Jake with new interest. The alien warrior had expected fear or hidden aggression from the humans, but this young officer showed genuine curiosity about Krythani culture. For the first time since arriving in human space, Vaxthal began to think that these strange, small beings might be worth knowing after all. Jake's direct approach had changed everything about the diplomatic meeting. Where formal protocols had failed, his genuine curiosity about Krythani culture opened doors that Ambassador Stone's careful words could not. Vaxthal began to speak more freely about his people and their way of life as Jake asked questions that showed real interest rather than diplomatic necessity. Over the following days, Jake spent hours with Vaxthal learning about Krythani society. The alien warrior explained that his people had evolved on a world where only the strongest survived. Every creature on their planet was designed for violence, and the Krythani had to become perfect warriors just to see another sunrise. Their culture valued courage, honor, and the willingness to face any challenge without backing down. Your species confuses me, Jake Parker, Vaxthal said during one of their conversations. You show curiosity and courage, but your people responded to our arrival with fear. Among the Krythani, such behavior would be seen as either weakness or hidden aggression. Jake thought carefully about his response. He was beginning to understand that the cultural gap between humans and Krythani was much larger than anyone had realized. Humans fear what we don't understand, but once we learn about something new, that fear usually turns into friendship. We just need time to get to know each other. Vaxthal made that rumbling sound that Jake had learned was Krythani laughter. Time is a luxury that warriors cannot afford. In battle, you must judge your opponent's worth in seconds or die from hesitation. But we're not in battle, Jake pointed out. We're trying to become friends. The alien warrior was quiet for a long moment as he considered Jake's words. Among the Krythani, friendship must be earned through tests of courage and strength. We cannot trust someone whose spirit we have not seen in combat. Jake began to understand the problem. Human diplomacy was based on careful words and negotiated agreements, but Krythani culture required proof of character through action. The two approaches were so different that they might as well be speaking completely different languages. What kind of test would prove someone's spirit to the Krythani? Jake asked. Vaxthal's red eyes brightened with interest. There is a ritual called the Trial of Hearts, where warriors test each other's courage through combat. It is not meant to kill, but to reveal the true nature of each participant's spirit. Jake felt his heart racing at the implications. The idea of fighting a 12-foot-tall alien warrior seemed like suicide, but he was beginning to realize that it might be the only way to build real trust between their species. Would such a trial be possible between a human and a Krythani? The ritual can be adapted for different species, Vaxthal replied. But you must understand that even non-lethal combat with a Krythani warrior carries great risk for smaller beings. Jake thought about everything he had learned during his time on the station. The formal diplomatic meetings were going nowhere, and tensions between the two ships were actually getting worse as more humans began to fear the alien presence. Unless something changed soon, the first contact between humanity and the Krythani would end in mistrust and possibly conflict. I want to participate in the trial of hearts, Jake said quietly. Vaxthul stared at him in surprise. You are serious about this request, Jake Parker. Do you understand what you are asking? Jake nodded, even though his hands were shaking slightly. I think it's the only way our people will ever understand each other. Someone has to prove that humans have courage even if we're smaller and weaker than Krythani. The alien warrior was quiet for several minutes as he studied Jake's face. Your spirit is stronger than your body, small human. Very well. I will arrange for the trial of hearts to take place tomorrow. Both of our peoples will witness this test of courage. Word of the upcoming trial spread quickly through both ships. Captain Morgan tried to forbid Jake from participating, but he pointed out that no one else had been able to make progress with the Krythani. Ambassador Stone was horrified at the idea of risking human life in what he saw as barbaric combat, but Jake argued that understanding required taking risks. Dr. Carter spent hours analyzing Krythani physiology to help Jake prepare for the trial. The alien warriors were incredibly strong and fast, but they were also much heavier than humans, which might slow them down. Jake's best chance would be to use his smaller size and agility to avoid Vaxthul's attacks while looking for opportunities to demonstrate his courage. The trial took place in the station's largest cargo bay, which had been cleared to create an arena. Representatives from both ships gathered to witness the historic event. Jake could see the fear in the faces of his fellow humans, while the Krythani observers watched with obvious interest through their viewing screens. Jake entered the arena wearing simple combat clothing and protective gear that Dr. Carter had designed. Across the room, Vaxthul appeared wearing traditional Krythani combat attire that consisted of metal bands around his arms and torso. The alien warrior's forearms moved in complex patterns as he performed a ritual warming ceremony. Remember, Jake Parker, Vaxthul called across the arena. This trial is not about victory or defeat. It is about showing the courage of your spirit when faced with overwhelming odds. Jake nodded and tried to calm his racing heart. At 6 feet tall and 180 pounds, he felt like a child preparing to fight a giant. Vaxthul stood 12 feet tall and weighed at least 800 pounds of solid muscle and bone. The alien's forearms gave him advantages that no human could match. The trial began when Vaxthul gave a roar that shook the walls of the cargo bay. Jake dodged to the side as the alien warrior charged forward with surprising speed. Those massive feet left dents in the metal floor with each step, and Jake realized that even a glancing blow could break bones. Instead of trying to match Vaxthul's strength, Jake used his human agility to stay ahead of the alien's attacks. He rolled under swinging arms and jumped over sweeping leg attacks while looking for opportunities to strike back. When he did land hits on Vaxthul's massive frame, they had no visible effect, but Jake kept fighting anyway. The battle became a deadly dance as Jake weaved around Vaxthul's attacks. The alien warrior was holding back his full strength, but even his restrained blows could have crushed a human. Jake began to realize that Vaxthul was testing his determination rather than trying to defeat him quickly. As the fight continued, Jake noticed that Vaxthul was adapting his fighting style to match Jake's smaller size. The alien began using more finesse and technique rather than relying purely on overwhelming force. It was as if Vaxthul was teaching Jake about Krythani combat while testing his courage at the same time. 20 minutes into the trial, Jake was exhausted and covered in sweat, but he refused to give up. When Vaxthul knocked him down, Jake got back up and continued fighting. When the alien's attacks left him gasping for breath, Jake found new energy and pressed forward. He might not be able to win, but he could prove that humans never surrendered. The trial reached its climax when Jake managed to grab onto one of Vaxthul's massive arms during a grappling exchange. For just a moment, the small human held his ground against the giant alien warrior. It lasted only seconds before Vaxthul's superior strength broke the hold, but the symbolic victory was complete. Vaxthul stepped back and raised all 4 arms above his head. The trial is finished, he announced to the watching crowds. Jake Parker has shown that humans may be small in body, but they are mighty in spirit. I name him brother warrior and friend to the Krythani people. Jake collapsed to his knees, breathing heavily but smiling despite his exhaustion. Around the arena he could see the amazed faces of his fellow humans who had watched him survive combat with an alien warrior. For the first time since first contact, the two species had found common ground through courage rather than fear. The weeks following the Trial of Hearts brought dramatic changes to the relationship between humans and Krythani. Jake's demonstration of courage had opened doors that formal diplomacy could never have unlocked. Vaxthul began sharing detailed information about Krythani culture and technology while human scientists and engineers worked alongside alien specialists to understand each other's capabilities. Jake found himself in the unique position of being the primary liaison between the two species. His friendship with Vaxthul had earned him respect among the Krythani, while his fellow humans looked to him for insights into alien behavior. He spent his days moving between the two ships, helping to arrange exchanges of knowledge and cultural information. Captain Morgan established a permanent communication link between the USS Horizon and Vaxthul's vessel, which was called the Dark Honor. Human officers began taking tours of the alien ship, while Krythani warriors visited human facilities to learn about Earth technology. The initial fear was slowly being replaced by curiosity and mutual respect. Dr. Carter was amazed by Krythani engineering, which combined incredible durability with surprising elegance. The aliens had developed materials that were stronger than anything humans had created, and their ships could travel faster and farther than Earth vessels. In return, the Krythani were fascinated by human adaptability and the way Earth engineers could create complex solutions using relatively simple components. Jake spent most of his time with Vaxthul learning about Krythani history and the worlds they had explored during their travels across the galaxy. The alien warrior spoke of incredible battles fought against impossible odds and victories won through courage and determination. But Jake began to notice that all of Vaxthul's stories seemed to end with his people moving on to another world, rather than staying to build permanent homes. Your people seem to travel constantly, Jake observed during one of their conversations. Don't the Krythani ever settle down and build lasting civilizations? Vaxthul's expression grew dark at the question. We travel because we have no choice, Jake Parker. The Krythani once had a homeworld called Thysis-Korin, where our ancestors built a great civilization. But that world was destroyed long ago by an enemy that follows us still. Jake felt a chill at the pain in his friend's voice. What kind of enemy could destroy an entire planet? The alien warrior was quiet for several minutes as old memories played across his scarred features. They call themselves the Devourers, and they are not truly alive as we understand life. They are machines built by some ancient race that died out millions of years ago. The Devourers exist only to consume and expand across the galaxy. Vaxthul activated a holographic display that showed images of the enemy Jake had never seen before. The Devourers looked like a nightmare fusion of organic and mechanical parts. Their ships were massive constructions of dark metal and pulsing energy that reminded Jake of diseased organs more than spacecraft. The creatures themselves were even worse, with bodies that seemed to shift between different forms as they absorbed new materials. They consume everything they encounter, Vaxthul continued. Worlds, ships, entire species are broken down into base materials that feed their endless expansion. The Devourers have been spreading across this galaxy for centuries, and nothing has been able to stop them permanently. Jake stared at the horrifying images and tried to understand the scale of what Vaxthul was describing. How many Krythani survived the destruction of your homeworld? Less than 1 million warriors and their families escaped when Thysis-Korin fell. We have been fighting a running battle against the Devourers ever since, while searching for allies who might help us make a final stand against them. The implications hit Jake like a physical blow. That's why you came to human space. You weren't exploring or looking to conquer. You were looking for help. Vaxthul nodded grimly. Our scouts observed human space battles and were impressed by your species' ability to adapt and innovate under pressure. We hope that together our peoples might find a way to defeat an enemy that has destroyed dozens of civilizations. Jake felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. Humanity had been so focused on the fear and wonder of first contact that they had missed the real reason for the Krythani arrival. These alien warriors weren't invaders or even explorers. They were refugees fleeing from a threat that could destroy both species if it wasn't stopped. "How long before the Devourers follow your trail to human space?" Jake asked quietly. Vaxthal's red eyes burned with ancient anger. "Our rearguard actions have slowed their advance, but they are persistent hunters. I estimate we have perhaps 6 months before their main fleet arrives in this sector." Jake's mind raced as he tried to process this information. 6 months to prepare for a war against an enemy that had destroyed entire civilizations. Humanity's small fleet of exploration vessels would be useless against the kind of threat that Vaxthal described. They would need to combine human technology with Krythani military might to have any chance of survival. "We need to tell both our peoples about this immediately," Jake said. "If humans and Krythani are going to fight together, we need to start preparing now." The revelation about the Devourer threat transformed the relationship between the two species once again. Captain Morgan called an emergency meeting with Vaxthal and the senior officers from both ships. When the alien warrior explained the true situation, the fear in the room was different from the original first contact terror. This was the focused fear of soldiers who knew they faced a battle for survival. Ambassador Stone tried to contact Earth Command to report the situation, but the quantum communication array could only transmit so much information across interstellar distances. The basic facts got through, but the detailed tactical information would take weeks to relay completely. By then, the Devourers might already be attacking human colonies. Dr. Carter began working with Krythani engineers to understand Devourer technology and find potential weaknesses. The alien machines were incredibly advanced, but they relied on predictable patterns of attack and expansion. Human creativity might be able to exploit those patterns in ways the Devourers wouldn't expect. Vaxthal shared tactical data from hundreds of battles against the enemy. The Krythani had learned to fight the Devourers through bitter experience, but they had never been able to achieve more than temporary victories. The enemy always returned with more ships and better adaptations to counter Krythani strategies. Jake found himself coordinating between the various groups as they tried to develop a combined defense plan. His friendship with Vaxthal made him the natural choice to serve as liaison between human and Krythani military planners. The work was exhausting, but he knew that the survival of both species might depend on how well they could learn to fight. Together, the first long-range sensor contacts appeared 2 weeks later. Massive objects were moving through space toward the human colonies at incredible speed. The Devourers had found the trail left by the Krythani refugees and were following it straight toward Earth space. Jake watched the sensor readings and realized that everything they had worked for would be tested in the coming battle. Thal stood beside him as they studied the enemy approach vectors. "They come in greater numbers than I have seen before, Jake Parker. It appears the Devourers view your species as a significant threat to be eliminated quickly." Jake looked at his alien friend and saw the same determination in those red eyes that had carried the Krythani through centuries of warfare. "Then we'll have to prove them right. Humans and Krythani together against an enemy that thinks it can consume the galaxy." The alien warrior placed one massive hand on Jake's shoulder in a gesture of friendship and respect. "If we must fall in battle, brother warrior, then we will fall together. But perhaps our combined strength will be enough to finally stop the Devourer's advance." Jake nodded as he watched the enemy fleet growing larger on the sensors. In a few days, they would face the ultimate test of the alliance he had helped to build between two very different species. The future of both civilizations would depend on whether human adaptability and Krythani courage could overcome an enemy that had conquered half the galaxy. The combined human and Krythani fleet gathered in the Kepler system to make their stand against the approaching Devourer invasion. Jake stood on the bridge of Vaxthal's flagship, Dark Honor, watching as ships from both species moved into battle. Formation. The sight was both inspiring and terrifying as humanity prepared for its first interstellar war alongside their new alien allies. Captain Morgan had transferred half the USS Horizon crew to work with Krythani vessels, while Vaxthul assigned his best warriors to serve aboard human ships. Jake found himself in the unique position of being the primary tactical coordinator between the two fleets. His friendship with Vaxthul and his understanding of both species made him invaluable for coordinating their very different fighting styles. The human fleet consisted of 12 ships, including exploration vessels that had been hastily converted for combat. They were fast and maneuverable but lightly armed compared to the massive Krythani warships. The alien fleet brought 20 vessels built for brutal close-range combat with armor thick enough to withstand incredible punishment and weapons designed to tear through enemy hulls. Dr. Carter had worked around the clock with Krythani engineers to develop new tactics that combine the best of both technologies. Human stealth systems would hide Krythani assault ships until they could close to effective range, while alien shield generators would protect human vessels during their precision strikes. The plan looked good on paper, but neither species had ever fought the Devourers alongside allies before. Jake studied the sensor readings as the enemy fleet approached. 300 Devourer ships were moving toward the Kepler system in perfect formation. Each vessel was a twisted fusion of organic and mechanical components that pulsed with malevolent energy. The largest ships were over 2 kilometers long and bristled with weapons that could reduce planets to debris. "They are more organized than usual," Vaxthul observed as he watched the tactical display. "The Devourers have learned from their encounters with both our species and have adapted their approach accordingly." Jake nodded as he analyzed the enemy formation. "They're treating this like a major battle rather than just another conquest. That means they see our alliance as a real threat." The alien warrior's scarred face showed a grim smile. "Good, let them fear what they have never faced before. Two species fighting as one against their endless hunger." The first phase of the battle began when the Devourer fleet entered the outer edge of the Kepler system. Human long-range sensors tracked every enemy movement while Krythani battle computers calculated optimal attack vectors. Jake coordinated the information flow between both fleets as they prepared to engage an enemy that had destroyed civilizations across the galaxy. The opening salvo came from human ships using new torpedo designs that combined Earth technology with Krythani power cores. The weapons struck the enemy formation and created massive explosions that lit up space like dying stars. Several smaller Devourer vessels were destroyed, but the main fleet continued its advance without changing course. Krythani warships moved forward to engage the enemy at close range, while human vessels used their superior speed to strike at weak points in the Devourer formation. The combined assault was more effective than either species could have achieved alone, but the enemy responded with terrifying efficiency. Devourer weapons tore through space with beams of energy that could slice through starship hulls like paper. Their organic components seemed to writhe and adapt even during combat, making them harder to target effectively. Jake watched in horror as 2 human ships disappeared in balls of superheated plasma, while a Krythani heavy cruiser was torn apart by mechanical tendrils that erupted from an enemy vessel. "They're learning our tactics too quickly," Jake reported to Vaxthul. "We need to change our approach before they counter everything we're doing." The alien warrior nodded and activated the fleet communication system. "All ships execute pattern 7. Human vessels provide cover while Krythani ships break through their center formation." The battle shifted as the combined fleet implemented tactics that neither species had used before. Human ships created electronic interference that confused Devourer targeting systems, while Krythani vessels charged through the chaos to engage the enemy at point-blank range. The coordination required split-second timing, but Jake's position as liaison made it possible. For 3 hours, the battle raged across the Kepler system as both sides adapted to each other's strategies. The Devourers had superior numbers and technology, but they had never faced an enemy that combined 2 completely different fighting philosophies: human creativity and Krythani determination. proved to be a deadly combination. Against an enemy used to predictable opponents, Jake coordinated strike after strike as the combined fleet slowly gained the upper hand. Devourer ships that tried to adapt to human tactics found themselves facing Krythani weapons they couldn't counter. Enemy vessels that focused on fighting Krythani warships were destroyed by human precision strikes they never saw coming. The turning point came when Jake noticed a pattern in the enemy communications. The Devourers were using a central command ship to coordinate their adaptive responses. If that vessel could be destroyed, the rest of the fleet would lose much of its tactical flexibility. "Vaxthal, I've found their command center," Jake called, out over the noise of battle. "It's the largest ship in their rear formation, but it's heavily protected." The alien warrior studied the tactical display and saw the same thing Jake had noticed. "A direct assault would cost us half our remaining ships. We need another approach." Jake's mind raced as he considered their options. The command ship was surrounded by layers of defensive vessels, and its own weapons could destroy anything that got too close. But there might be a way to reach it if they were willing to take an enormous risk. "What if we use the Dark Honor as a battering ram?" Jake suggested. "Your ship has the strongest armor in the fleet. We could punch through their defenses and get close enough for a killing blow." Vaxthal was quiet for a moment as he considered the plan. The Dark Honor was his flagship and had been his home for decades of warfare against the Devourers. Using it in a suicide attack would mean sacrificing everything he had left of his old life. "It would work," the alien warrior finally said, "but the Dark Honor would not survive such an assault. We would have to abandon ship just before impact." Jake looked at his friend and realized they were both thinking the same thing. "Or we could stay and guide the ship manually to make sure it hits the target. Someone has to ensure the attack succeeds." The alien warrior placed a massive hand on Jake's shoulder. "You do not have to make this sacrifice, brother warrior. Your people need you to survive this battle." Jake smiled despite the chaos around them. "And your people need you to survive too. But sometimes the most important thing is making sure the job gets done right." Together they began preparations for the final assault. The Dark Honor's crew was evacuated to other ships while Jake and Vaxthal remained on the bridge to guide their vessel toward the enemy command ship. Human and Krythani vessels provided covering fire as the massive alien warship accelerated toward the heart of the Devourer formation. Enemy weapons hammered the Dark Honor's shields and armor as it charged through the defensive lines. Hull plates were torn away and internal systems failed, but the ship's Krythani construction held together long enough to reach its target. Jake worked frantically at the navigation controls while Vaxthal managed the ship's weapon systems. "Impact in 30 seconds, Jake reported as the enemy command ship grew larger on their screens. "All systems are holding, but we won't survive the collision." Vaxthal looked at his human friend with respect and affection. "It has been an honor to fight beside you, Jake Parker. You have shown that courage comes in many forms." Jake nodded as he made final course corrections. "It's been an honor to know you too, Vaxthal. Let's finish this together." The Dark Honor struck the Devourer command ship at full speed, and both vessels disappeared in a massive explosion that lit up the battlefield. The enemy fleet immediately began to lose coordination as their central command was destroyed. Human and Krythani ships pressed their attack against confused opponents, who could no longer adapt quickly to changing tactics, but Jake and Vaxthal survived the impact. At the last second, emergency systems had ejected the bridge section as an escape pod. They crashed on a nearby planet where they had to fight off Devourer ground forces while waiting for rescue. The experience proved that their friendship had made them both stronger and more capable than either could have been alone. When rescue ships finally arrived, they found Jake and Vaxthal defending a crashed Devourer facility they had captured. During their time on the surface, the two warriors had not only survived, but had turned their crash landing into an opportunity to gather intelligence about enemy operations. The combined fleet's victory in the Kepler system marked the first time anyone had decisively defeated a major Devourer invasion. News of the battle spread quickly through both human and Krythani space, inspiring hope that the galaxy's greatest threat could finally be stopped. Jake and Vaxthal became symbols of what two species could accomplish when they worked together. Months later, Jake stood on the observation deck of a new space station built jointly by humans and Krythani.